Welcome back. We're at chapter 6. There's something you should know about Leroy, chapter 6. Okay. Here we go. Chapter 6. 8 more years, huh? She studied his face through the mesh screen. He seemed to be aging exponentially. Every 2 weeks she came to visit, he looked 2 years older. Pops, 8 more years. This time it wasn't rhetorical, just a plain sad statement. This time he responded, just 8 more. He forced a smile. She waited an hour and a half almost every visit, most times standing on the corridor while they claimed to be trying to locate him. Then they had to search the food. She had to taste it. The toiletries she had brought for him in the transparent plastic bag had to be searched. Sometimes items were returned to her, unsafe for the prison environment. Then he would creep out timidly in his khaki shirt and khaki pants, too big for him now that he was shrinking. Prudence was sure he had lost at least 10 pounds in 2 weeks. He would shuffle from side to side as he spoke to her through the mesh screen. He was self-conscious. He figured she was scanning him up and down, judging him, resenting him for being a fool and getting into trouble and leaving them. I'm teaching now, you know, Prue, he said, hoping for some redemption. They're letting me teach some of the guys to read. That's good, Pops. Good. So, how they treating you? You eating alright? He nodded. You lose weight though. How's your health? He looked down, avoiding her eyes. He didn't want to tell his daughter that he was dying. He had ignored the symptoms for too long. He had been afraid of what the news would be. Then, when he finally asked to see the doctor, things had progressed to the point of no return. How Maud and the boys and Prim and Daff, he asked, trying to sound chirpy. They're fine. They send their love. But I was asking about you, Pops. How your health? The usual. Pressure a bit high. Had flu whole of last week. Nothing out of the ordinary. Taking some meds and thing. Prudence thought, how curious. When you're sitting on a chair waiting for students to capture your likeness and get it over with, 20 minutes move like a sloth on vacation. When you're talking to the man who was whipped from your life, handcuffed as you screamed and begged them not to take him, even as you watched your uncle's blood drain from his body. This man who had been but a shadow of a memory for 12 years. When you spoke to him, 20 minutes zipped by like a cheetah in pursuit of a gazelle. You still harassing that old guitar? He chuckled, kind of like an afterthought, an old joke they shared, an old rag that came in handy to mop up unfortunate spills. Boy, I remember that old guitar. Can't believe it's still holding up. Time up, announced the warden. Prudence pressed her own palm against the screen, signaling to her father to do the same. They always parted this way. She felt the warmth and the roughness of his palm. At least, he's not doing hard labor. She tried to comfort herself. He's teaching, that's good. Next 2 weeks, Pops, she said. Take care and don't lose any more weight. He smiled and turned from her, and the warden led him down the passageway. Prudence heard a series of heavy clinks and the sound of padlocks, metal shutters, iron bars. She could no longer see him. She imagined her father being once again confined to his cell, away from wife and children, away from a hard day's work for a hard day's pay, away from the duty and satisfaction of incurring bills and settling them, away from the nagging peck of a woman who loved him, away to solitude to mourn the loss of a brother forever. Prudence walked away from the general penitentiary on Tower Street, pretending not to hear the jeers from those prisoners who could see her pass. They were handcuffed and were en route to various places, the sick bay maybe, or to courts. This was one of the few times that she made sure to wear a very long skirt and full blouse. Her father had cautioned her. Some years ago, she had visited and her attire had triggered a series of unsolicited remarks from the prisoners. Her father, who at that time had been where he could hear them, had some choice words of his own to extend to them in warning. Leave my daughter alone if you know what's good for you. She bought boxed orange juice from a street vendor and finished it in one go, surprised and amused at how thirsty she had been. She wasn't hungry though, no appetite. Visiting her father always sent her into a temporary depression from which only a couple of hours on her guitar could retrieve her. It was, after all, his guitar. She had found it in the same year that they had taken him away, buried in some barrels in the back room of the house where they lived then. Maud had said she could keep it, an old 6-string acoustic guitar from the 1960s when her father used to play in a small band, nursing hopes of stardom. The strings had needed tightening, the body had needed a good polish. Prudence had found her bosom friend for life. She taught herself how to play. She cried herself to sleep, playing, wanting her father. She had been Daddy's baby. Maud used to call her that. All she had left of him was his guitar. Prudence passed Ferdy on the bridge, dragging a bag of raked leaves and twigs towards the rubbish heap. He ran a little business doing chores for the neighbors, offering services such as mowing, weeding, raking, pruning, anything garden related. He had worked out different rates for each, negotiable. He was a flexible businessman. You could talk to him. Prudence figured he couldn't have been home from school for more than 2 hours, and already he had pruned 8 feet of hedging that bordered Mr. Johnson's yard and had cleared away the rubble. The neighbors always paid him promptly. He gave them good work. Pop says hi, said Prudence to Maud, plopping down on the couch. He looks thin though. I don't think he's eating right. Poor soul, said Maud. She shook her head and gazed off into the distance. They take the food you carried for him? They take it, but I had to taste it first, as usual. Maud nodded. She understood. Some of the people who visited could not be trusted. Not everyone was honest. By the time you quint 8 years rolled by, he'd been in there 12 already. Seemed like yesterday. Him soon come out now. Prudence went to fetch her guitar and returned to the veranda. She sat on the floor and crossed her legs, leaned against the couch, and wrapped the huge skirt around her. Maud chuckled. It was rare to see Prudence swaddled in clothing. Play something, Prue, Maud said. Cheyenne came out onto the veranda and sat next to Maud. You play well, she said. I can't play any musical instrument, not even the drum. She laughed at her own lack of talent. Prue could teach you, Maud suggested. Show her how to do it, Prue. Prudence continued strumming. I think you have to have some kind of talent to begin with, said Cheyenne. I have none whatsoever. All I can do is clap. Prudence chuckled half-heartedly. She wasn't into much talking when she was playing her guitar. Plus, she was still sad from seeing her father. She closed her eyes and continued playing, trying to shake the heaviness. Ferdy came in at about 6 o'clock, just when the mosquitoes were starting to descend. They all went indoors and had dinner. They never ate as one family unit around a dining table. Each person went off to his or her quarters or to the spot on the couch to watch the evening news, balancing the plate in their laps or on trays. Daphne had cooked. Stubbs sat in his wheelchair and ate while he watched the news, until the news started to watch him. He never missed any broadcast of the news. He watched the television news at 3 points during the day, and he listened to the radio news almost every hour on the hour. He had to keep abreast so he could hold his own whenever Indian tried to convince him of something that was not so. Most times, Stubbs prepared his own meals of special food that his doctor had recommended due to his diabetes. But sometimes he said to hell with diabetes, and he allowed himself to splurge. He accepted dinner offerings from Maud, who piled his plate high with generous heaps of rice, yams, dumplings, green bananas, and chicken, slobbered with gravy, ketchup, hot sauce, and all manner of contraband. There was not the least ounce of guilt on the old man's face. Something will take you to Shut-Eye Country might as well be something tasty. But by the next day, he would be immersed in shame and scouring to redeem himself, sending Ferdy to go fetch aloe vera and cerasee leaves to make a bitter concoction that he would purge himself with for 7 days to restore order to his system and put him back in good standing. But Ferdy awoke after everyone had finished eating. He helped himself to dinner, all the while being watched by Maud as she whispered under her breath. "That damn boy just eat and sleep," she muttered. "Would never try to do something constructive like his brother." When Freddie sat down to eat, Maud said out loud, out of spite, "How much money you make today, Freddie? I see you working hard helping out the neighbors. How much you collect today?" 1,500, announced Freddie, intoxicated with pride. "Whoa," shouted Maud, deliberately animated. 1,500? You're richer than me, Freddie. Wish other people would put themselves to good use and start earning their keep. Put up your money, Freddie, my boy, so you can have it to spend later and buy yourself anything you want." She threw a spiteful look at Freddie, who was busy attacking a chicken leg. He missed the point completely. Cheyenne nibbled at her food, watching and listening to everyone. "Shy, you eat too dainty, man. Nobody not watching you eat, you know. Bite into your food like you mean it," Maud encouraged. "When you used to live here first, you never play with your food." Maud loved to see people diving heartily into their food, except for Freddie. As strange a sentiment as it was for a mother to have, she felt he didn't deserve so much food. Perhaps she was comparing him too much to his twin, who seemed to have charted a clear path and was headed straight for it. Freddie was as lanky and sinewy as a thoroughbred, strutted like one, ate like one, never gained an ounce of weight, and never expended a joule of energy. That was the only difference. Was she being too hard on him? How would Benji have dealt with the situation? Her other children had needed only a push in the right direction, a little hand to guide them as they scurried along the straight and narrow. She was a firm enough mother, a few slaps from the leather belt when necessary, nothing to raise alarm about. She gave them ample warnings, pulled her daughters to the side whenever the situation warranted a little private chit-chat. She gave them treats when she could afford it, icicle or ice cream from the fudge man on Sundays, pretty lace panties at Christmas time when the clothes lady was passing, a little family outing to Emancipation Park during the August festivities. She had done her best, given her meager resources, and with her husband whiling away his days in prison. But with Freddie, it hadn't seemed enough. She had cut across the straight and narrow. he had cut across the straight and narrow, hopped over the retaining wall, and was galloping through the field of uncertainty. Maud shook her head. Stubbs had fallen asleep with the plate in his lap. The evening news had pounded him into submission. His head was leaning off to one side. Maud thought of wheeling him into his room, but decided against it. Stubbs didn't like anyone moving him while he was asleep. He always liked to be fully conscious of where he was being taken. Maud removed the plate from his grasp and supported his head with a cushion. It was the least she could do for the man who could put her out into the streets if he felt a mind. Maud felt a strong sense of indebtedness towards Stubbs, a feeling she had hoped never to have for any man, except perhaps her husband. Many times her rent money had come up short, very short. Sometimes it hadn't come up at all, but cowered at the bottom of the hill as a promise. It had caused her so much embarrassment that sometimes she opted to relay the information by note via one of the children, rather than face Stubbs with the news that once again she couldn't meet her obligations towards the rent or electricity or water bill. She felt even worse when Stubbs sent back the note saying that everything was alright and she could pay when she came into some funds. The whole process was debilitating and recurrent. Ferdy sat in front of his bed. He was mighty pleased with his week's business. The transactions had flowed smoothly. He had mowed 3 lawns, pruned a huge almond tree that had been inching dangerously close to the high voltage wires, trimmed 2 hedges, bagged all the trash, and hauled them out to the garbage heap in neat piles. It had been hard work, but well worth it. He had whistled to himself as he worked. Ferdy had long ago given up the task of inviting his twin to share in his labors. Freddie hissed his teeth whenever he was asked to lend a hand. Ferdy kept his money in an old butter cookie tin that he wrapped in a shirt and pushed far up under the bed. Freddie had never stolen from him, but he still preferred to keep his life savings well out of harm's way. He was about to reach for the cookie tin when he saw someone at the door. It was Cheyenne. "Hey, Shy," Ferdy greeted her, a bit taken aback because she had never come to his room before. Cheyenne walked over to the bed and plopped herself down. Her one big plait swung itself over her shoulder and rested on her bosom. "What you up to?" she asked. "Nothing much, just getting ready to go wash up and hit the sack. Been a rough day," said Ferdy proudly. He felt like a hard-working man coming home from a full day's work and chatting it up with the wife before bed. "I saw you working, that's very nice. It made me miss home though." "Really? Why?" "I used to go into the fields to help my aunts in Pitford. We grow lots of vegetables. I miss them so much." She leaned her head to the side and propped her chin up with her hand. "Why you leave then?" Ferdy asked. Maud didn't tell him everything that went on in the world. He may be earning his own money, but he was still a child. She would admonish him when he started asking about things that she wasn't ready to tell him, or that she outright didn't know the answers to. Cheyenne lay across the width of the bed. She had propped her head up in her palms and swung her feet from the side of the bed. But suddenly, she buried her head in the pillow and started crying uncontrollably. Ferdy had never had a girl cry on him before. He was as proud as he was scared. He wondered if he should go fetch Maud or Prudence. He decided to man it out. "What happened, Shy?" he asked, standing in front of the bed, not sure whether he should sit down. "Shy, what happened?" "I need someone to talk to, Ferdy. I'm so depressed and confused." Her skinny arms were jerking because she was still sobbing. "Want me to go call Prudence?" he suggested. No, don't bother, Prudence. I'll soon be okay. Sit down, Ferdy. I'm alright. Just need a little friend to talk to. Ferdy was flattered. A pretty girl wanted to confide in him. Life didn't get better. You can tell me. I won't tell anyone. I know you won't, Ferdy. She sobbed for another few minutes. Then she rolled over on her side and looked up at Ferdy with big wet eyes. She told him of the squalor of her pitfall home, a small house shared by an extended family of 14 people, including 5 adults who worked their fingers to the bones, tilling the land and hardly saw anything come of it. The grandparents had both passed on. The uncles and aunts bickered non-stop about how the meager land was to be parceled. The cousins scampered about in rags and lived lives of scrounging and truancy, relying on the kindness and pity of neighbors. I don't mind working on the land, but it didn't produce much. Pit 4 is a hell of a place to try to grow anything. Our land is rocky and barren, lamented Cheyenne. But I would still go back today if it wasn't for Papa. He's a wicked old rumhead man. He beat me for nothing. She told Ferdy of the last few days before she decided to run away. Her father had come home drunk on 3 consecutive nights and had beaten her every time. He found fault with everything she had done or neglected to do, in his opinion, from the way she kept the little room that they shared to the fact that there was nothing but crackers and tin mackerel for dinner. Wasn't he the one who should provide? Wasn't he the father? Apparently not. He whacked her with the back of his hand, flung the plates at her, then he tried to strangle her with his bare hands. Finally, he took off his leather belt and beat her mercilessly. Ferdy's eyes bulged in terror. He had never been beaten mercilessly, and who could beat such a sweet girl like Shy Shy? That is a wicked man, said Ferdy. He was outraged. Didn't your aunties and uncles help? They don't care. They're so used to seeing him beat me. They treat their own children just the same. Wicked, said Ferdy. What about school, Shy Shy? I dropped out when I was in 3rd form. I have no money in the world. I ran away with just a small bag of clothes. I hitched a ride to Ochi, then to Spanish Town, then to Portmore. Anything could have happened to you, Shy Shy. My God, from so far? Ferdy pictured Cheyenne cowering in a corner as her father rained down blows and insults. He pictured her hitching a ride all the way from Mobay to Portmore. Poor Shy Shy. He rubbed her head. End of chapter 6. Alright, so join me for the next chapter, please.